Good morning and welcome to the NHVR's webinar on fatigue management. My name is Michelle and I'll be your webinar moderator. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available on the NatRoad website and YouTube channel. Our presenter today is Sam Chapman, Policy Advisor, Fatigue and Human Factors at the NHVR. Sam is passionate about managing fatigue in the workplace and believes people matter. Sam joined the NHVR in 2020 and recently transitioned into the Policy Advisor, Fatigue and Human Factors role. Sam guides the Fatigue and Human Factors team on advanced fatigue management cases, using his legal training to advise on HVNL compliance across a wide range of fatigue and record-keeping requirements. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks for the introduction, Michelle. Good morning. Thank you for taking the time to allow me to present. As Michelle has pointed out, my name is Sam Chapman. I joined the NHVR in 2020 with the Customer Experience team as a support specialist, advising industry on wide-ranging matters from access permits and notices to accreditation modules, requirements, vehicle standards, PBS, chain of responsibility, and fatigue. Most recently, I've been involved with reshaping the advanced fatigue management space and providing pre-application support and guidance for AFM applications. As Michelle mentioned, I've moved into a policy advisor role for the Fatigue and Human Factors team and use my background within NHVR and the AFM case manager role to oversee advanced fatigue management applications. I use my legal training to help advise on policy matters surrounding a wide range of fatigue, human factors, record keeping, and compliance matters dealt with under the HVNL and broader legislation. I'd like to also introduce my colleague, Paul Kay, a Safety and Compliance Officer for NHVR's Operation Unit, Southern Region. Paul brings with him a wealth of knowledge as a vehicle crash investigator from the police. Paul and I will both be available for questions after the presentation. So on the agenda today are 5 main topics of NHVR's strategic approach to managing fatigue, these being understanding fatigue, identifying fatigue and the impact that it does have, fatigue management strategies, and recording work and rest. I'd like to first start with understanding fatigue. A basic definition of driver fatigue is referenced on the screen, which is driving while feeling sleepy, physically or mentally tired, or lacking energy is a major heavy vehicle hazard. So that's all well and good, but what does this mean for a driver? NTI's 2023 Major Crash Investigation Report said it best. Fatigue can lead to drivers involuntarily disengaging from driving tasks due to an impairment from a lack of sufficient quantity and/or quality of rest. An important note to remember when speaking about fatigue management: it's not about driver compliance with work hour limits. Many factors contribute to fatigue, but major ones that drivers face are listed on the screen. These are not getting enough sleep, driving at night, and being awake for a long time. When it comes to not getting enough sleep, studies have shown that 5 hours in a 24-hour period and 12 hours in a 48-hour period are the minimum thresholds to best managing your fatigue levels. Anything that goes beyond that or less than those requirements endangers drivers and the public. You are not getting enough rest. Driving at night. Danger periods are generally between midnight and 6 a.m. However, this can vary due to a multitude of factors, some of which are circadian rhythms and other road users. Insofar as circadian rhythms, when are drivers used to sleeping and when are they used to working? Drivers used to working between midnight and 6 a.m. and sleeping between 6 p.m. and midnight may not experience their lowest circadian ebbs between the traditional danger periods of midnight and 6 a.m. Other road users, a lot of the time light vehicle drivers, significantly contribute to the major danger period of midnight to 6 a.m. for crashes. Being awake for a long time. So ideally, NHVR suggests shorter maximum driving times with 15-minute rest periods. Again, in a perfect world, this would be somewhere between a 2.5 to 3 hour drive time before taking 15-minute rest breaks. Obviously, this isn't always possible. Fatigue specialists engaged by NHVR to provide expert guidance around fatigue stress that there is an over-reliance on work and rest hour compliance. Fatigue is something that cannot be avoided in the workplace, but rather needs to be managed. The only way to manage fatigue is to ensure that drivers obtain sufficient quality rest between driving tasks. Simply put, fatigue management can be summarized for our purposes today by this phrase. It's about hours slept, not hours worked. I'll stress that again. It's about hours slept, not hours worked. Signs of fatigue that drivers can use to identify when they are tired and should rest are listed on the screen. These are feeling very tired, growing tired quickly after you start activities, lacking motivation, problems with concentration and memory, slower reaction times, poor mood, problems focusing, problems with hand-eye coordination, or taking risks and making errors that drivers wouldn't usually make had they not be fatigued. I'd like to focus on 2 of these signs if I could. Growing tired quickly after starting activities and taking risks or making errors that drivers wouldn't usually make had they not been fatigued. So growing tired quickly after you start an activity. Studies show that when you are fatigued, taking short rest breaks help to alleviate the signs of fatigue, but it's important to understand what's driving that advice. If you're to pull over and take short rest breaks every 2 to 3 hours, this helps manage fatigue. But if you're not getting out of the vehicle, you're not taking short power naps, you're not moving around, you're not putting proper risk controls in place, you're not taking that time to get proper food and drink, what tends to happen is that you can take your short rest periods, and as soon as that is done, it's like you haven't had a break at all. Getting out of the vehicle, taking short power naps, putting proper risk controls in place, like stretching, moving, proper food and drink, it helps drivers take rest breaks that are of quality rest, not just resting for the sake of compliance. These are some of the reasons behind NHVR defining stationary rest as being outside the fatigue-regulated vehicle or time spent in the ADR-compliant sleeper berth of a fatigue-regulated vehicle. Taking risks or making errors that drivers wouldn't usually make had they not been fatigued include examples of switching lanes at inappropriate times, missing turns or exits on the highway, failing to maintain consistent and appropriate speeds. These are all indicators that drivers could use to say, I need to be able to pull over and take discretionary rest when I need it. This means that schedules and rosters need to be flexible enough for drivers to have absolute authority to stop and rest when they are fatigued. This also leads into a company's requirement, not necessarily under NHVR's business rules, not necessarily under the HVNL, but as good fatigue management strategies, to have a quality, just culture policy, not only enacted in their business, but actively adhered to and utilized by drivers. This allows drivers to be able to have the absolute authority to pull over and take discretionary rest when they require it, not just when it's scheduled. This is a very good example of how to manage driver fatigue while on the road. So continuing our signs of fatigue points of discussion, when we're talking about fitness for duty evaluations, it comes down to people really are poor judges of their own levels of fatigue, performance, and decision-making. Fitness for duty tools provide objective criteria, a way to evaluate risk, a mechanism that supports risk-based decision-making. There are things that you can use within fitness for duty assessments like the Karolinska Sleepiness Scale, which is an internationally recognized standard for persons to judge their own fatigue on a scale from 1 to 9. 1 being that you're not fatigued and completely ready to start the day, continue your drive, whatever it may be in your circumstances. A rating of 9 would suggest that you need to stop work immediately due to the signs of fatigue. Effective fitness for duty assessments, NHVR do recommend that they're taken before the commencement of a shift, and also, if possible, conducted by a third party while you're doing your shift. This may not always be possible if a driver's out of phone range or has no way to contact the depot, or vice versa. But for this reason, it is recommended that fitness for duty assessments can also be self-conducted assessments done by the driver at any stage, but of particular importance is before they look to exceed approved operating limits. Fitness for duty assessments can usually be broken up, or not broken up, but include different criteria. That being, are you under the effects of drugs or alcohol? Drugs also including prescribed medication, not just illicit substances. How much rest have you had in a 24 or 48-hour period? As mentioned before, 5 hours of sleep per 24 hours and 12 hours of sleep per 48 hours are the recommended levels to best manage fatigue. Anything below those levels tends to result in a diminishment of performance due to increased fatigue levels. Other aspects of effective fitness for duty assessments do include risk controls, risk countermeasures that are implemented when there are certain thresholds that are hit as designated by the fitness for duty assessment. An effective fitness for duty assessment should also include other mechanisms like the Karolinska Sleepiness Scale that I was mentioning earlier. All of these factors combined into an effective fitness for duty assessment does allow drivers to conduct self-assessments or third-party persons to conduct a fitness for duty assessment on drivers to effectively gauge their levels of fatigue and how best to manage those if they are to continue to drive. Fatigue impacts drivers' ability to drive safely on the road. The impact of fatigue on drivers can be measured in multitudes of ways, but on the screen are 5 examples that can be used by drivers to basically recognize when they are fatigued and the impact that will have on their driving abilities. Things like slower reaction times, a loss of attention, drifting over lanes, variations in driving speed, and difficulty remembering driving the last few kilometers. If I can just touch on a couple of the conversations I've had with, in particular, police officers in the field of crash investigations. A lot of the time, police officers have found that when they are conducting fatigue-related investigations, they do find that a lot of drivers can't remember when their last, say, hour of the journey. For example, if you were traveling from the Gold Coast, you might ask drivers whether or not, what's the last exit they remember passing? This has been a major identifier of whether or not drivers are fatigued when conducting crash investigations. If we're to look at fatigue management strategies, you can split them a lot of the time into 2 different categories. Fatigue management strategies, or risk controls and countermeasures, you can put in place before you drive and also when driving. Particular importance, I feel, needs to be also put on the risk controls and countermeasures that are taken before a driver gets behind the wheel. Often these are in the days that lead up to a driver's work period. Things like getting a good night's sleep, avoiding driving at times where you would normally sleep, avoiding long drive times after a day's work, understanding the effects of any medication that you're taking that might have on your driving, the importance of planning ahead, so working out your rest stops, overnight stops, prior to getting into the vehicle, cannot be understated. This allows you the proper time to schedule your vehicle to allow drivers to take discretionary rest. So when you're driving, you need to take regular breaks. As we were speaking about before, obviously it's not always ideal or able to be able to take rest breaks every 2.5 to 3 hours. But in a perfect world, you would aim to take a 15-minute short rest period every 2.5 to 3 hours when you're driving. If it's possible, share the driving load. Eating healthy food and drinks cannot be understated. A lot of the time when you're drinking coffee, it's all good if you have 2 or 3 coffees, but you will notice a crash 2 to 3 hours later. And I don't mean a vehicle crash, obviously. I mean a crash in your fatigue levels and your blood sugar levels. Avoiding driving at night isn't necessarily always possible. And for some shift workers, particularly drivers, that's all they do. They drive at night. So it's important to remember that this coincides with avoiding driving at times where you would normally sleep. So for example, if you're transitioning from a BFM work and rest hours option that is usually started at 6 a.m. and finishes later in the day, before transitioning to, say, an AFM work and rest option that you may have in your business, you really need to make sure that you're working that AFM work and rest option. If it starts at night in particular, you need to be doing non-driving tasks for a full roster cycle, usually 14 days, but it can vary, before you start to move your circadian rhythms and before you start that schedule for the AFM night roster. This will help your body to adjust its circadian rhythms to ensure that you aren't that you are driving to align with your body's preferred work and rest times. When you're driving, it's also important to recognize when you start to feel tired. And this all works back into your company's culture, your company's policies, adhering to just culture policies. Just culture policies are extremely important. A lot of the time, companies have one in place, but it's not necessarily actually implemented. It is of utmost importance that drivers recognize and are empowered to have the authority to stop and rest, the authority to take discretionary rest without being penalized. Many companies we know of at NHVR do this very well, and it's a credit to the industry. So if we get into the compliance side of things, what is a fatigue-regulated heavy vehicle? So fatigue laws apply to fatigue-regulated heavy vehicles, which are defined as vehicles or combinations with gross vehicle masses of over 12 tonne. A vehicle or combination, together with its load, exceeds a gross vehicle mass of over 12 tonnes, or buses with a GVM of over 4.5 tonne fitted to carry more than 12 adults, which includes the driver. Some exceptions do apply, so certain SPVs and motorhomes, and that's under section 7(2)(a) and B of the HVNL. For the purposes of fatigue-regulated heavy vehicles, the GVM of a vehicle is the registered GVM or GCM for combinations, which may be less than what is specified by the manufacturer. So the National Driver Work Diary. What is it? The National Driver Work Diary, so a logbook or simply a work diary, is evidence that a driver's work and rest hours are compliant with the HVNL. I don't necessarily agree that it is evidence that their fatigue is being managed. It is evidence that a driver is complying with the HVNL's maximum work and minimum rest times. This doesn't necessarily mean that your fatigue is being managed properly. Compliance doesn't always equal safety, despite it being a very big and important part of the fatigue space under the HVNL. Drivers aren't allowed to drive or work more than the maximum work hours or rest less than the minimum rest hours in certain periods set out by the law. These do differ between standard hours and BFM, which is basic fatigue management. Advanced fatigue management differs completely in that it's a tailored work and rest option that can be used to safely manage the workload, the rest times, and the maximum work times a driver can be expected to complete. It's important to complete the work diary correctly and in accordance with the HVNL and ensure that you are counting time correctly. So defining work time. It's a matter that becomes of particular contention a lot of the time for drivers, companies, company schedulers, and operations managers. So work time includes all tasks to do with the operation of a fatigue-regulated heavy vehicle. This can include not only driving, but sitting in the driver's seat with the engine on, waiting in the line of vehicles to load or unload, loading and unloading the vehicle, inspecting, servicing, or repair work that is conducted to the vehicle, attending to the load or to passengers on a bus, cleaning or refueling the vehicle, instructing or supervising another person, recording information or completing a document. So, for example, when you're filling out your logbook. It doesn't matter if any of these tasks are occurring on private property, on a road, or a road-related area. They're still classified as work. A good example of this that often comes through to the fatigue management team are heavy vehicles that are being operated with an elevated work platform on the back of the vehicle. The scenario is usually described to the fatigue management team as I'm operating a vehicle with an elevated work platform on private property. When we're operating the elevated work platform, does that count as work time? The answer is yes, and it comes back to the core of the definition of work time under the HVNL, which is all tasks to do with the operation of the fatigue-regulated heavy vehicle. So, for example, in the scenario I've just outlined, operating the elevated work platform, if it's part or under power of the heavy vehicle itself, is a task that is connected to the operation of the vehicle. Therefore, it is work time. So the National Driver Work Diary, when must you carry it? So you've got to carry it and be able to produce it when driving a fatigue-regulated vehicle. You've got to carry work diary records for 28 days after the record's made whenever you drive a fatigue-regulated heavy vehicle. So there are options if you'd like to transition to an electronic work diary. This can be found at the NHVR's website of www.nhvr.gov.au and performing a simple search in the taskbar in the right-hand corner, just type EWD. Up will pop a couple of links and it will be quite easy to provide, or find rather, a list of accredited EWD providers under the website. What are some of the record keeping requirements? So, drivers must give the yellow copy, which is marked duplicate, to their record keeper within 21 days of the date recorded on the daily sheet. All records must be kept for 3 years after they're created, kept at a location accessible to an authorized officer for audit or investigation purposes. And importantly, they must be in a format that is readable and reasonably assumed it will continue to be readable in at least 3 years from the date of its creation. What do drivers do when they've maybe lost, destroyed, or had a work diary stolen. Simply put, you use supplementary records. Just because you've lost, stolen, or just had a work diary destroyed doesn't mean that you cannot record your work and rest time. Drivers must still record their work and rest time, but you use a supplementary record to do it. There are copies of a supplementary work and rest time page, or sorry, a supplementary record on the NHVR website at www.nhvr.gov.au. Again, you look into the top right-hand corner of the website for the search bar and type in supplementary records. It will give you a template that you can use as a supplementary record if you've lost your work diary, had it stolen, or it's destroyed. You must notify NHVR within 2 business days if you can't purchase a replacement work diary. Again, this can be accessed via the Contact Us page on the NHVR website of www.nhvr.gov.au. When you're making supplementary records, the information you would normally record in your work diary must also be recorded. You can only use supplementary records for a maximum of 7 days before you purchase a replacement work diary. So, we now move on to electronic work diaries, some of the benefits and who provides them. On the NHVR website, again, www.nhvr.gov.au, if you search for EWD, what will come up is an EWD register. This contains a list of the 11 approved providers that can be used as electronic work diaries. NHVR cannot recommend which of these providers you should use. But for this reason, there are contact details on the EWD register. Use these details to contact EWD providers. Speak with all the EWD providers. Weigh up the benefits that they will have in your business and choose the right provider. Some of the benefits of EWDs. They have improved data accuracy and transparency. They have the ability to provide real-time data and also give in-vehicle driver information. So when we talk about in-vehicle driver information, we're meaning rest warnings, so that you no longer have to sit there as a driver and go, oh no, I have a rest break coming up in 6 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and you haven't planned where to pull over to actually complete your rest. EWDs record work and rest information to the minute. They also automatically pre-populate some records. Essentially, benefits that you will most notice as a driver is it reduces the time during roadside enforcement. It assists transport operators to monitor their business and improve their fatigue risk management. Now, that has been a little bit shorter than I was anticipating, but for that reason, both Paul and I are available for questions. Thank you for your time. Our information is on the screen. If you do have any questions that you would like answered, whether it's to do with written work diaries, electronic work diaries, fatigue management, or advanced fatigue management applications, please don't hesitate to use the email address fatigue.management@nhvr.gov.au. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Sam. I have a few questions, and if anyone has any questions, please type them in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and then I can answer that, or we can read it out, and Sam and Paul can answer that for you. The first one I have is, what can be done in terms of policy reform and compliance to shift fatigue management more towards managing risk and not just counting hours on paperwork?
So at the moment, the strategic policy team at NHVR is looking at exactly that. At the moment, we're in consultation with NST so that we can see, NTC rather, so that we can try and implement alternative compliance options. What they look like, we're not sure yet, but we are in the process of looking at what can be done to reform fatigue policy so that we're not just looking at written work diaries as evidence of managing fatigue, because as I've stressed, and as we all know, compliance doesn't equal safety.
Thank you. Thanks. We have another one. Is operating a concrete pump while on site work? Can a driver give a photo of the yellow page to their employer?
So I will check that one up if there's anyone who would like to send through questions to fatigue.management@nhvr.gov.au. But ideally, what would allow you to have an exemption for work and rest time would be the concrete agitators notice, which would allow you under certain circumstances to have an exemption for recording work and rest times. But again, if you want specific examples or specific advice relating to your driving requirements, I urge you to send through your inquiries to fatigue.management@nhvr.gov.au. Provide your driving requirements, and we can see whether or not the concrete agitators notice would actually be of use to you.
Great. With fatigue compliance the drivers must meet, it is often frustrating when the nearest rest area is full or not existent. Should more be done to provide drivers with facilities they need to manage their fatigue?
Paul, I might ask you to chime in on this one if you've got any thoughts. Personally, I do believe that we need to look at ways we can engage with rest areas, rest providers, to improve the quality of the rest areas. As to providing more more rest locations, I'm not sure that the NHVR would have the authority to be able to do that, but it's certainly something that we have been looking into a long time, and how we can influence that sphere to provide more rest options.
Yes, I'd just like to add to that as well there, Sam, is that we also do, as an on-road officer, get asked that question quite a lot from the truck drivers about rest stops and whatnot. But from what I believe, that the same with the NHVR in providing these stops is, not to be able to, well, they can't provide the rest stops, but we advise the drivers if they're asking us on roadside if there's anything within an area, we will advise them to go to those spots to rest up.
Great. I have another question following on from that. Can you confirm that drivers have a 7-minute allowed window to get to a rest area when going on the 7-hour break? If yes, is it only allowed for the 7-hour break?
Paul, I think you might be better placed to answer this one.
I would have to get back to you on that one. I don't have that paperwork in front of me at the moment to fully answer that, so I can certainly get back to you on that.
So I'm more than happy to look into that as well to see if we can provide a more comprehensive answer.
Yes.
What was the question again? And I can just make sure that I've got that one.
Yeah. Can you confirm the drivers have a 7-minute allowed window to get to a rest area when going on the 7-hour break? And if yes, is it only allowed for the 7-hour break?
Okay. And is there an email we could send that response to? Any idea?
It was an anonymous question, but maybe just send it. If you send it to me, I can, they can maybe get in touch with me. Oh, I've got an email here. I can send that to you afterwards.
Yeah,
Appreciate
I
it.
haven't. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And then we have another one. How might the HVNL reforms under consideration impact compliance for my business?
It's a very broad-ranging question. The HVNL reform is going to touch on so many different aspects. Unless we've got specific aspects of your business that you'd like advice on, it's kind of difficult to answer that question. it's touching on all parts of the HVNL, especially fatigue management. There will be reforms made. So it will impact businesses, but what we're hoping is that it impacts the operation sides of the business in a positive way, not in a negative way.
Wonderful. So yeah, that's the end of our questions. I would like to invite all participants to please email your questions either directly to the NHVR or you can email info@natroad.com.au as well, and I can pass it on to Sam and Paul. Then we'll have your contact details with that as well, which will make it easier for them to respond to your personalized request. Thank you very much, Sam and Paul, for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much, guys. And
Thank
if I
you.
could just add, once again, best contact point for your fatigue-related questions is fatigue.management@nhvr.gov.au. Thanks very much for your time, guys. Really appreciate the opportunity to present.
Thank you.